Great, guys. Well, it looks like we've had a decent number of folks join. So welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to be chatting about communication approaches with our clients and how we can facilitate effective communication across the client's life cycle to make for easier and deeper connections with clients and better workflow all around. So this is the next webinar in the series where we've been discussing how we can improve our overall engagements with clients. We've discussed onboarding and expectation management, defined scopes of work and project management. As I mentioned today, we're going to be chatting about communication, and we have a couple of other planned webinars on budgets and contracts and effective cross-selling and repeat work out in July. So I have a really, I guess, funny story where we accidentally told a client "F you." Now, this was a dramatic event, as you can imagine, where we got a very nasty email saying, "What the hell are you guys doing? You just told me F you." And so we had this very panicked moment of trying to figure out what is going on. How did this happen that we addressed an email with FU? And after a lot of digging, what we ended up finding out was that this particular client or an employee at this lead's firm filled out a web form and got frustrated at the web form and ended up putting FU in the first and last name. And this, of course, came through to Zoho campaigns, and we did a big email blast as part of a drip. And of course, it addressed them by the first and last name, and hence we had this issue on our hands. So it was one of those.
You literally can't make this stuff up.
No. And man, we were running around in a panic for a day trying to figure out, if we had an employee go rogue or like what had happened, had our systems been hacked? And yeah, as it turns out, we could trace back that web form submission and realize that it was the client themselves. So while communication is so important and getting off on the right foot is key, this is just one of those weird anecdotes where automation can be your best friend, and it can also potentially cause some problems. So in today's chats, we'll be discussing different communication channels, where we can automate things, and where we should perhaps do a manual review occasionally to account for some of these things. So at the end of the day, we just wrote a little rule that would automatically update or delete any profanity from a first or last name field so that this would never happen again. But lesson learned.
The Zobots app has a list of profanity in all different languages that you could use to ignore anything on this list.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah,
automation, it gives and it takes.
That's certainly one to jot down there. Hopefully you guys don't encounter the same quirk that we did. So today we're going to be chatting a little bit about communication. We're going to be talking about how we approach communication and what effective communication means to us here at Catalyst. We'll also go over some of the communication channels, frequency, and content, and really look forward to having our panelists today weigh in. You guys have met both of these folks before. We have Susan Clark from Cornerstone Solutions and Vinny Rajendran from Nimbus. So it's a pleasure to have you guys, and thanks so much for coming back to chat to us about communication.
Glad to be back.
Great. So I really like this quote. As I was thinking about how we approach communication, and I think that really resonated that the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I think that it is very easy to speak and to hear, but to actually comprehend and make sure that meaningful communication has taken place is a much harder thing to do. And it becomes so very important for us in the consulting world to facilitate effective communication, because that's really the crux of any good client engagement. So I've kind of broken this down into 4 different pillars of communication. And the first one is really setting ourselves up to listen well. Now, when we do client intakes, we really try to facilitate as much engagement around that as possible. And that starts with listening, where of course we want to open up and just find out what a client is looking for. Usually this starts with a verbal call via Zoom or web conference, via phone, to really just get that initial intake of what their problem statement is. From there, we facilitate additional stakeholder interviews, and we, through our client portal, as you guys have seen, ask them to provide written documentation of what their problem statements are, what their objectives are. We then translate those verbal and written needs into workflows and diagrams to get more of that visual component of what's going on. And we find that really having those 3 components, a verbal, a written, and a visual component to understanding a client's needs, really help us listen well and make sure that we are understanding everything that the client is conveying. I'm sure you guys have been down this road before, where a client says, hey, we want to do this better, or we're having a pain point with our proposal process, but they really give you very little about what that process is and what the actual pain is. And what we found is that we really need to engage with clients. We need to tell stories. We need to give anecdotes, testimonials, case studies. We need to show them, what is possible, so we can draw out more detail. And in doing so, we find that we are able to get a client to loosen up, to share more, and to really dive into further detail around their process. And of course, as you start to find that thread, then it's really important to ask questions. And I cannot tell you how many questions we ask. We just try to pull deeper and deeper, because oftentimes what a client brings us as an initial problem may not be the root cause or the actual pain that they're facing. And we find that if we are able to find that little thread and start to ask questions, we can really get to the root of what the actual pain points are before we start to propose solutions. So at the end of listening, engaging, questioning, then it really comes to this comprehension of taking all of this information that we've gathered and synthesizing it into what client is really meaning by what they're saying. And this has really set us up well to get a little bit deeper in our client engagements, and I think really become as much a business consultant as a technology consultant. And that can be a slippery slope. It's for another day. We'll get to that in cross-selling and future engagements. But I think that it becomes very important for us as technology consultants to listen well and engage. So with that being said, we obviously facilitate this all through our portal, and we provide examples and ways to draw clients in and show them what we've done in the past. I'm curious to open it up to Venu and Susan. What do you guys do to really synthesize information and pull on those threads and get clients to open up and share what they actually mean, so that you can be more effective on the consulting side?
Yeah, I think, from what you were saying before, like good listening, it's definitely not a problem that is just specific to the Zoho community, right? It fuses everything that we do in life, right? And listening to me, like really, if you're doing it correctly, that last part, that synthesis, right? You're supposed to be able to iterate that back, right? And I strongly believe that if you can't put something into words, that means you don't understand something, right? Or words or written, or some type of communication. If you can't communicate it, you don't actually understand it, right? And I think it's really invigorating for clients to hear back what we have to say when we take some of these like loose thoughts and we see kind of the connections between them, we bring that together and then we iterate that back in a concise statement that really just represents our understanding. Oftentimes I've seen that like clients just, it frames for them something that they haven't seen before, right? And so when it comes to good listening, I think it comes to good, iterating back. And then the other thing that I'll say is just from the design perspective, really focusing in, especially in those earlier stages of the design process, on users, on user behavior, or on human behavior, right? Most of the times the problems that someone is calling out, like you said, are not don't lead to just directly the solution. There's actually like a deeper problem within that. And oftentimes, especially in systems and software, that's because people are doing things incorrectly, and that's not their fault, right? It's we can build systems that help inform the use and design, right? And we want to just identify really what are those pain points, but what are users really struggling with, or even just it's frustrating, it's burdensome. Where are they? Where's their anxiety building, right? And oftentimes asking on those will help us determine the solutions that we need going forward. And clients also love hearing that back when they're like, oh my gosh, like that is something that my team has been experiencing, but we like it's just kind of been like just subconscious, like just below that threshold,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you hit the nail on the head there. Being able to regurgitate back in a more organized fashion a client's needs really help to build trust and rapport. And Susan, I think that you do this very well. I mean, even in the conversations that we've had, I think that you're a very active listener. Can you share with us some of the tips and tricks that you've learned over the years to really help facilitate effective communication?
Sure. I mean, John Mark, first, I think that you have nicer clients than mine. I think at least, I don't know, maybe 50% of mine have no idea what process they want. They, in addition to helping them with Zoho, they want us to actually like, okay, well, help us design a process. And so to a certain extent, we're listening, and you're listening that they don't know it, they don't know anything. But I guess the other thing is we try to enforce that they fill out, we have a form, whatever that they fill out. The form obviously comes back into Zoho, and I like to have multiple people in the organization fill it out, because like I say, one of the questions is, do you have a sales process? And the president will say, yes, we do. And the salespeople will go, no, we don't. So that tells me a lot right there. There's a lot of questions in there that, it's good to hear from multiple people in the organization, not just the owners. I mean, I guess there's a couple of things. There's two things that I probably try and emphasize. One is the people that are in the meeting are usually the people who are going to pay me, which is they're the management team. And so I always try and represent the end users in my mind the whole time there. What will the end users think? What will they do? What will they actually, you can say you want all these things, but what, garbage in, garbage out. That's, I think, the reason Salesforce does so well is because their charts are beautiful. It's just that nobody wants to fill in the information to make those charts.
Yeah.
But dang, I had 2 points. The other thing is to focus on what is the outcome. We almost focus on what is the outcome first, because I think I saw one of the chats go by where people go, they don't always want what they say they want. I know one client I got one time said, here is what I asked Zoho how to do this, and this is what they told me, but it's not working. And I'm like, that's right, because it's not designed well. He goes, but Zoho told me that. I said, well, technically you asked them a question and they technically told you how to answer it, but it wasn't really the right question. You weren't framing what your end result wanted to be. And sometimes that's hard to get past to a client, because they'll go, well, I just want to work on this part right here, and I don't want to go any farther yet. I'm like, I understand, we'll just work on this part, but I have to see the bigger picture. If I can't see the bigger picture, then we'll end up starting in the wrong point if we don't get there. I mean, we worked with one last week where we needed to do something. I said, do you need this out of analytics, or do you need books to invoice this at the end? like where are we going with the end result? And I think those are the two things, is just to get them to help them figure out what their own process is, kind of guide them. And I think you're right, just giving stories or examples of what other people have done and helping them visualize what do they want. That's one of the first questions we ask is, what would make this wildly successful? Or how will you know too? And how will you know it didn't work? At the end of the process, what will be the key that will let you know it didn't work?
Yeah, I think that is very important. And yeah, I think it's important for us to put ourselves in our client's shoes. We've been living in this technology world, day in and day out for years or decades, right? And for us, navigating in and around Zoho is just so intuitive. We can literally do it with our eyes closed. And clients are coming to this ecosystem or even technology from scratch, and they're overwhelmed and their thoughts are disorganized, and they've never really thought about their business in a very linear way. That's really a requisite for us to have an effective implementation. So I think that it is important for us to take a step back, understand where the client is coming from, and use stories and good use cases to really guide a particular flow. And helping to facilitate that with examples, I think, can really help clients synthesize their and really organize their own thoughts to say, yes, that is what I want. And having some frameworks to guide some of those conversations can be very important.
I mean, well, our database actually is a mess because we put all these examples in that we could use, to show people stuff, the things that, like I've got things with hospitals and physicians and just weird things that are not really relevant to our business, but they're great ways to show examples of how something might look. Would you want to do something like this or like this? And without actually showing any competitor or any other databases.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that having that library of functionality that you can pull from is very important, and certainly a good part of an efficient build and profitability, which I'm sure we're going to want to probably have a discussion around that, how to effectively use case studies or use cases, copy customizations to really give good examples to facilitate good communication, but also use as a starting point for an implementation.
Yeah.
So let's discuss a little bit about how we can start to facilitate this good communication. I think that it's very important early on as an organization to define your communication channels. I mean, these days it can be overwhelming. I mean, you have email, you have a support desk, you have phone, you have web conferences, text message, social channels. It really can be quite daunting. And as we started to scale, what we realized is that we really had to be judicious in picking the right channels. And it became far too cumbersome to meet clients on the channel that they wanted all the time. We had some clients that wanted to use Signal, others that wanted to, chat on my cell phone. And man, that became so difficult to have a consolidated place for communication. And if there's anything that I would impart, it's that never give your cell phone out, and make sure that it's not on your signatures unless you want calls at 11 o'clock at night, because it will happen. And the other thing is to probably really pick a few channels and do it well. Some lessons learned for us is we really try to point all communication through to Zoho Desk. And then from there, we actually just wrote a little custom function that would route that ticket to the account owner from the CRM. And that was a nice little simple way to route those tickets to the account manager that had done the initial implementation. So we try to push as much through Zoho Desk as possible, and then everything through email, followed by a scheduled Zoom call. And in picking and choosing a handful of channels like that, it really helped us to make sure that all communication was documented properly. Obviously, through support tickets and emails, it's easy for everyone else to reference in the system. And then it also, by mitigating how many folks had direct phone lines, we avoided interruptions. And this can be a pro and con. And I'd love to open this up to you guys, because we route all calls through our office manager, and then she may take a message to give to an account manager or developer. And we found that if we routed calls directly through to folks, the temptation or the pressure to answer the call and deal with the problem and interrupt your flow was huge and caused a lot of disruption and broken thought. So to Susan and Vinu, what are your guys' preferred communication channels and why?
Susan, you want to go first?
Sure. Email. Years ago, I remember sitting in a client's office and watching all the people in the company. This is a big company where their phones would ring and nobody would answer. And it was a good lesson for me. I don't answer my phone. It goes to voicemail. They can leave a voicemail. If the voicemail, when I look at it, if it's not for me, I can forward it to somebody else. I don't like the phone. That's terrible, and I know it's not a good thing. But I live on email. I live to do workflows that push emails and to push the communication. I have clients that get emails like 3 months down the road based on a quote or proposal I gave them, and it'll be something they're like, oh yeah, I'm still thinking about it. I'm like, dang, I didn't even remember putting them on this drip, that would ask them. So
Nice.
no, big email fan.
Yeah, I think you brought up an important point there, which is proactive communication. And Vinu, I know that you're kind of the king of automation. What do you use to help facilitate some of this automated communication, and what channels do you prefer?
Yeah, we really love automating things for other people. I mean, we definitely have our setups. I think that as a team, we've been moving towards consolidated channels like you described. It's been important for me in as many times as possible to meet clients at their communication, right? Especially early on. And as a new consultant, that was like very, very critical that, hey, we're going to keep this as absolutely low burdensome to you as possible, right? But now as we've, gained reputation and, have projects logged out until, the end of the summer already, it's definitely tough to, and I think that like the big challenge is it's almost like this tech debt. Like you've worked with clients over time, you closed projects, and then 3 months later, they got to contact you. Hey, like this thing isn't working, or I'd love to have a quick tweak on this, right? And you start leaving this kind of graveyard of clients that just kind of keep coming up, like a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there, enough to derail your entire day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, like Susan, I think I'm the only person in my generation where I prefer phone call to literally anything else in the world. I will stay on the phone all day and I would be totally happy. I'm the only person. Like everyone else is like, why are you calling me? Like it's so much more convenient, and I feel like I can get more accomplished done in that time. In order to facilitate that cleanly, being able to do that through the CRM is really helpful, right? Where it's automatically logging the calls, potentially logging the recordings when relevant, right? I know as a Zoho, Click is the one we're supposed to be using. And we do use Click, and I like to set up automated Click channels for some of our clients where it's almost like a support, like you can chat with Zoho support or you can chat with Nimbus support and we're going to get you an answer faster, but I prefer Slack as our norm, 100% communication. The new Slack Connect is really awesome. And I love to be like, the main reason why I like Slack is the ability to switch between workspaces. So you can really have like siloed environments for like client communication. So when I can have a client get a Slack workspace and they add us on, then I can see like, 50 channels for this specific, say Nimbus, right? But then I can switch to like another client and I can see the 18 channels that are relevant to them. And that's really helpful for the larger clients. Whereas with Click, you have like just a million channels. Like you'd have to be on every single one of these channels and it just gets a little bit messy, In terms of the automation around, we focus less on the communication with the clients because I'm just on the phone with clients often, and more on the task management side of it. So like both with Click and Slack, being able to take a query that comes in, email, take a query that comes in and add it to various task management and project management softwares, which are then all linked with all our Zoho systems. And being able to close those out and being able to track our productivity is kind of the trick for our channels. So
Awesome.
You put your contact information in their Click?
I put my contact information everywhere. So everyone just has my contact information, because at the end of the day, I think it's a hard thing to scale, but I want people to be able to just be, talk to someone that like isn't a developer, isn't just kind of filtering out, but is someone who, if you have a question that could be answered by someone who's experienced, we can answer that for you within that one quick conversation, and then you're off to your day. And I'd rather have that and really have more of like an account manager type model where you're able to just directly call your account manager, even though it is like derailing your days. And I think that like the trick is how we structure and format our days in order to we're working on trying to find the balance between those two, where we're able to have, say, dedicated days for coding sprints, but days when we're generally more available, and trying to oscillate those in order to optimize productivity without, while still keeping this like really tight client experience. It's tough. It's certainly not perfect, and it's a working thing that we just are trying to find that middle ground.
I think that for us, there was a turning point probably maybe 2-3 years ago, where we were probably around 10 or 12 people in our organization, and we're supporting about 50 active projects at a time, that we had to move away from that model. And we generally preferred to be very available, and at scale, we now have 100 active clients that are either in new implementations or support, and a team of 23. We had to be more defined and close down some of that availability, because what ended up happening is we were just all peppering each other, both internally and clients, with questions, and the only time you could get your work done was in the evenings. So we've had to be now far more strict and actually close out blocks of time internally, where we block our calendar for dedicated work, and we try not to bother each other internally. And then for clients, we push it through Zoho Desk or email, so that we can get back within 24 hours. And that's our SOP is try to return an email within 24 business hours, because otherwise it's we found that we just got peppered too much and our productivity tanked.
I think it really depends on like the client and the client relationship, the client dynamic, like who they are. And we've been really kind of stratifying that by like, if they're a small, medium business, then there's sometimes, there's the dumber questions, right? And almost the volume of questions, right? And it almost become, it's almost like a privilege to be able to just, like get on the phone, just be able to resolve an issue, and we're trying to see how we can, adjust our models accordingly. It's a very complex problem.
I love the Click for internal, but sometimes I ask staff not to communicate with me through Click, because I'm typically in other people's accounts. So they're clicking in our account and I don't see the clicks, because I don't keep Click open in a separate window anyplace. So I'm sure that's the advantage of Slack, is that you can keep that extra window open, but it would also be the advantage of Desk. But then again, it's assuming that you're keeping your Desk client open at all times so you can see what's coming in. But that's no different than keeping my email open, I guess.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of pressure when an email comes in and a client is like, hey, I got a quick question. And it's just like, you want to answer it, and it's just, there's something about the perspective where when it comes in as a ticket or a task or something, even though it might even have exactly the same content and text, that like reduces the internal pressure or anxiety to like resolve it as fast as possible, because you're, oh, this person is waiting, right? And we still want to maintain that, but like trying to find the balance between those, and even just filtering them out and be like, oh yeah, you do actually need to look at this, right? It's coming to my email, but this is something that someone else on the team can handle. Like that, when it goes into like a desk process, it streamlines that and allows for the delegation of, oh, well, or if there's two people like looking at the same email, like, I don't know if someone on my team is looking at it or addressing or even typing that response at the same time as me, and something like desk where it's like, hey, this is the delegated person, is definitely powerful for managing those email communications.
So I'm just curious here. Maybe you can throw up in the chat or raise your hand if you have an issue with how to log time against all of those little support queries, what you bill for, what you don't, and how do you account for that little 5 minutes here or there 20 times a day. So I'm sure a number
it's
of us
tough.
can identify with that. So I'd like to shift a little bit here to touch on some of these other aspects, and that is refining who is a good point of contact at your client's company. Especially with larger clients, what we found early on is that if we didn't set up a singular point of contact, the project became very chaotic, and we channel as much as we can through a single point of contact to ensure that there is someone that understands everything that's going on the client side, and that we can mitigate problems where there's conflicts between requests and scope creep where there aren't approvals. So I think that having a dedicated point of contact definitely improves overall project efficiency and keeps it on track. The other thing that I want to point out that's been immensely helpful for us is documenting and archiving every single piece of communication. So everything that we do is recorded, whether it be email, phone call, or of course, a web conference. We actually wrote a little bit of automation so that every time we launch we use Zoom as our primary video conferencing software, because it automatically records the call to the cloud. And then we actually just did an API integration from Zoom to Zoho into our client portal, so that within 3 hours, that recorded call gets automatically uploaded to that client's folder on their client portal. And this really touches on the access piece, because oftentimes we'll have a call and other stakeholders need to go back and reference it. And we don't have to go through and dig around and try to find that recording. It's all automatically uploaded to that client's portal. And having all of those calls recorded has really helped us go back and, if we missed a note or had to go back and reference something, or a client made a request or gave approval of something, if we can point back and say, here's the conversation where we discussed this or made this disclaimer, it really helps resolve issues quickly, or just mitigates them to begin with, because you can reference back to that conversation.
So Mark, are you recording actual audio calls, like from, I think you use Twilio? I mean, are you doing those or only the Zoom meetings?
Every meaningful conversation happens through a web conference. We don't really do phone calls. It's only inbound phone calls that we would then schedule a web conference for.
Got it.
I think, Susan, you can do that though with most of the VoIP integrations, which is.
I mean, we could too. I just was more curious if he was saving phone calls too.
Yeah. I mean, being able to do a webhook to take that into the everything, assuming stored in work drive, right, is going to be really fun.
Yeah, so for us, we've had to kind of do a little bit of a patchwork until now, because we started off as a Google. We use Gmail, and just when we first got started as an organization, we got set up with G Suite. So naturally, all of our client files and everything is built out on Google Drive. And the way that we facilitated that automation is we actually are driving it from Zoho. So when a meeting is scheduled through a Google Calendar, it syncs with the Zoho calendar. The participants who are invited to the meeting, obviously contacts in our system and belong to an account. And the way that we facilitated that automation is that we have a scheduler in Zoho CRM that runs every 3 hours that looks at all meetings that have taken place in that last 3-hour block. And it references the ID from the Zoom meeting URL. It fetches that meeting recording from Zoom. And then because we know the account that the contact belonged to, we also have a ID for the folder in Google Drive that that belongs to. And we grab that recording automatically and then drop it in that folder, which shows in the client portal. And it works a decent amount of the time. Of course, if that contact is a rogue contact and doesn't belong to an account, it won't upload, or occasionally that quirks, but that helps to automate probably a good 80% of our video uploads. So,
if you have like a call with, say, multiple stakeholders, multiple accounts, are you uploading files to each account, or are you doing like an aliasing system so it's just linked, uploaded once and then linked across the folders?
That is another problem where we look and see, usually all of the contacts belong to one account, but occasionally we'll be on a call with people from 2 accounts, and then we ignore certain account types and go to the client account.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a hard problem. And I'm working on this for the Zoho meeting, because with Zoho meeting recordings, the emails come in, but then of course the email names don't have like any uniquely identifying information to try and find the meeting record it's associated to, other than the name, which is not sufficient. So it's a good time. But managing, large files, managing all the recordings, we've started doing some breakdowns, just like very quickly, just having snippets of those Zooms, like instead of having these large files and clipping them out for like major sections, is super, super helpful. And usually when I have like myself or team members recording or reviewing some of these recordings for, hey, check out this thing, we discuss kind of the next steps and we can go from there, I'm like, it's at the end, just jump to around here. I try and find it and send the timestamps, but being able to like easily record those, segment them out, that's where we've been looking at tools like Loom, where you're able to, actually comment out or mark the timestamps on these recordings, and then also have them filed away for future access. I think is really, really powerful.
I think that using some of the transcripting features, so I think that there are a couple of things that we do that really save time. I certainly agree with you that in your notes from a call, putting the timestamp where certain things were discussed is very helpful. And then having transcripts to go back and search. So one of the things that we like about Zoom and the other third-party apps like Fireflies or .ai, they do automatic transcripting of the calls, and they can dial in. It's a bot that dials into the call and does transcripting for you, and that can actually add it to the notes in the CRM. Or just having, being able to search through that transcript can really help go back to that place.
Definitely.
So I'd like to touch a little bit on how we handle communication with a customer through their life cycle. So for leads, for generating scopes of work, for project management, and then for support. Just to give folks an idea of how we string this together. So typically when we engage with a client, they'll get an automated email. If it's a web form submission, our objective is to schedule that web conference. So we'll have an automated email going out thanking them for their interest, with a scheduling link where they can get on our calendars for that web conference. If they don't automatically schedule with us, we'll typically follow up with a phone call to try and schedule that call. If we don't get a hold of them via the phone call, we have an email drip that we actually facilitate through the CRM. And maybe this is a topic in and of itself. Do you do email drips out of CRM campaigns, or another marketing hub? I don't know if anyone's using that, but we facilitate a CRM drip with about 5 emails that go out of the CRM, as long as the lead status is still attempting contact or in qualifying. And then if they get through that drip and we haven't been able to reach them, then it goes to campaigns to put on like just a monthly drip. And we'll ask clients for feedback, if we missed them, if we didn't reach out soon enough, or what the problem may be. So for your guys' lead qualification process, are there any tools that we missing out on here at Catalyst that we should be thinking about in terms of proactively reaching out to leads?
I mean, we always, almost always, I link to them on LinkedIn. Christina, who is with Cornerstone, she monitors my email and she links to people on my behalf and pretends like she's me, which is really nice. She's really good at talking to clients that way and engaging them that way. Other than that, no, you've got a pretty good list.
How many followers do you have on LinkedIn, Susan? Gosh, you must be
Heck
in like
if I know. I don't care. I mean,
Over 9,000.
yeah, it's over 500. That's all. They just say
500
over 500. Then it's like, yeah, I don't ever look because I don't really care. I will link with most anybody.
Yeah, I think that is one of our two chosen social platforms, basically Facebook and LinkedIn.
And we always take the picture off of LinkedIn and put it on CRM because I think it helps me to remember conversations better if I just have a face with the conversation later on.
I'm that way as well. I think that is a very good tip for those of you that don't tie a visual cue with your conversations. If you start to have 10 conversations a day, it's impossible to recollect everything unless you have a photographic memory. So I love that tip.
Yeah, the one thing that we have set up in our system is every time a lead or really any account is created, it automatically adds labels in Gmail for us, and we add the brand color as a hex code as well. And so it finds the closest Gmail color that's supported and automatically colors the label, automatically flags contacts and any websites that are affiliated with the account. So all inbound communication is labeled appropriately in Gmail automatically, and it's color coded. Yeah, which is it's pretty slick. I'm working on trying to make it into an extension so other people can enjoy it as well.
That's
the one
cool.
problem
put me on that beta list.
it's super cool. And then the cool thing that you can do is you can make a custom related list in CRM instead of the default emails related list to find communications associated to those labels, right? Instead of having to use the emails related list, which will help against some of the IMAP things. And my hope is it just so depends on where Zoho gets on like the deals part, but then you'd be able to have for every deal sub labels in Gmail, right? And
Very cool.
Be able to automate that, right? So I'll jump in ahead from the leads process a little bit. It still helps us a lot with managing those leads, inbound leads, because I can't keep track of them otherwise.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue to scopes of work. And, typically we'll get an inquiry, whether it's a phone call or via desk. We'll discuss it, ask some questions, restate to make sure that we understand that problem. Same process as both of you had mentioned earlier, that we like to regurgitate back at them to make sure that we're comprehending what their needs are. We then have written confirmation through a written scope of work and approval process, and then again solicit feedback pretty often. And having this process to question, engage, restate, and get written confirmation really helps to make sure that we are doing the work in the right direction, and
Jean-Marc, how are you soliciting feedback? Is that a formal process, or are you just saying, hey, was that all you needed?
Yeah, so we try to, I've picked this up from some of our enterprise clients. We're going to be adopting more of a formal net promoter score and survey that we'll be sending out to clients. But typically throughout a client's life cycle, we will send an email that will really ask them for feedback on how the engagement has gone so far. So it may be things like, have we been able to respond to your queries in a timely fashion? Do you feel like our meetings are impactful or a waste of time? You know, is this where we are so far in the project where you expected we'd be from a budgetary standpoint and a functionality standpoint? Or, you know, maybe, hey, look, I know that we had to take a left turn halfway through this project to account for this thing that was unforeseen. You know, are you still comfortable with this engagement and how it's been progressing so far? And getting that feedback and you know, acknowledging that there may be problems along the way really helps build a strong relationship with the client. So oftentimes you know, if something didn't go smoothly, we'll be very upfront and we'll say, you know, I'm sorry that this took longer, or we have to, you know, figure out a workaround here. I know that this has impacted our timeline. You know, we feel bad about it. And wanted to get your feedback on, you know, if there's anything that we could have done upfront to help mitigate these types of issues in the future. And that creating that feedback and just having open, honest communication with clients has really helped us improve our intake and project planning so that we can try and flush everything out to mitigate problems. So right now it's more of an informal email that we send. But you know, I'd love to try and automate that through a more standardized survey. So I don't know if anyone in the chat or you guys have done a more formal Net Promoter Score survey, but I'm quite interested in diving into that further.
We're definitely working on figuring out what those feedback forms are. Like the tricky part is identifying what those milestones are, or like when is it appropriate to ask for like feedback, and what kind of feedback are you asking, right? And I think it's a really, really tricky problem. We've been kind of developing a series of different forms or surveys to try and assess at certain like key milestones, but then figuring out the automation side of that and how that builds into our internal process, right? And when's it appropriate, right? I think like it depends on like project timeframes and like what is the project type when we're asking certain things. The easy one is, you know, when the project is done, but sometimes projects are never done, right?
Yeah, well, how do you define done? So yeah, I think that frequent communication is really the name of the game, and we try to do it after the initial project plan. So after we've done the initial project plan and we have a formalized scope, getting feedback on, you know, what that process was like, and then we'll go through implementation. And at the point that we start the migration, we'll ask how the development process has gone, and then you know, towards the end, once they've been live, if there's anything that we could facilitate better when it comes to training or migration, and better planning for that. And I think that you know, we've been pleasantly surprised that we've been working with some really awesome clients that are very sophisticated, and we learn a lot from them. You know, there's some pretty good ideas out there, and I think that's one of the more rewarding aspects of our jobs, is that we get to learn, and yeah, every day there's something new to discover, which is fun. So for project management, our communication is generally facilitated through the client portal updates. So we have all of our time logs with the descriptions automatically posted through to the portal, so clients can see exactly what tasks are working on, how much time has been spent on them, what the status updates are, and that just helps clients keep more engaged as to the progress on the project overall. We will typically have email communication around reaching certain milestones to keep them updated. A lot of our larger projects, we have standing weekly meetings with clients, and in some cases, we have daily stand-up meetings. There's some large clients that want more dedicated support, where we literally have an hour-long daily stand-up and a dedicated account manager that's just quarterbacking day-to-day things that come up. And then what we have are also more formal reviews at key points in the project, if it's a certain phase that has been implemented. And then what we've also started is doing a quarterly business review from a technology perspective. So every quarter we'll sync up with the client and just ask them, you know, how did your quarterly business review go? How can we help you on the technology side to support those quarterly objectives? I think that being more proactive and engaged in the client's success like this has, at least for us, it's opened up a number of new opportunities, and it's both good and bad. I mean, we work with 95% of our clients on an ongoing basis, which is fantastic from a recurring revenue standpoint, but it also makes it difficult to increase capacity to open up room for new projects. So, you got to pick your poison, I suppose, but it's much nicer to work with mature clients that you've had a 2-year engagement with. It's just easier to facilitate than taking on the risk of a new client. So to you guys, what do you do throughout your project lifecycle to keep communication on track and again be more proactive rather than reactive?
Renew.
Yeah, I mean, on our end, managing projects is already fun enough, right? We kind of err towards over communication in and quick communication, really quick text, quick calls. But a lot of our projects, like we really stress like breaking them down into smaller projects and more packageable projects, or and so we can avoid a lot of the like, oh, like, well, this is the entire big scope. We're at like 25%. Like, how are we doing? We also do regular quote updates because a lot of our quotes and projects are more it mixed in with like, oh, well, I want to do this project, but I also need like support, like, and help me set up the, Twilio extension. And, I need to add SPF and DKIM for like, there's always ongoing support and retainer items. Right. So we try and kind of do, depending on the project timeline, maybe bi-weekly, like anytime there's an invoice that's out, bi-weekly or monthly checks on, hey, this is our quote progress, this is where we are, and we just update and adjust the quote to reflect what is remaining. And that way it's also serves as like a financial timeline for the client, But I love the quarterly review idea. We like to, definitely just maintaining those relationships with the clients is just awesome, and seeing how they're using their systems. I think my pet peeve is when a system is we've implemented, but then they're not using it. And I really want to understand why. And try like, where did we miss the ball? Like what did we not understand on how their users are engaging or how their company works? So we take definitely those time points to really assess the value of our project, but also just, is there like, did we do this right? Is this like the approach that we've done really correct?
Yeah, fantastic. I think segueing here to support, and I'm sorry to rush us along a little bit, but I want to make sure that we have 5 minutes for some Q&A here at the end. Our support process, as I mentioned, starts with a support ticket. We have a custom function that changes the ticket owner to the user who owns that account record in the CRM. We try to answer simple questions in desk, and it's inevitable that we're not going to be able to track time for all of the very simple questions. And for us in the partner community for Zoho, part of our responsibility and is providing that tier 1 support. And while we can try to charge for a lot of the support that we provide, especially if it's implementing new features, there are often times, where we have to provide simple support that we can't really bill for. It doesn't make sense to bill for 5 minutes to answer a question. So we try to facilitate that through desk, but if it's a more robust ask, then we push that through a scope of work to a work order. And we have a work order and task management system that we've built out to handle more robust needs. And we'll just follow our standard protocols for generating a scope of work, getting that agreed to, and then pushing it through as a new work order on a project. So there are a couple of things that I wanted to share with you guys. One of my favorite books is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Maybe that tells you how many friends I have. I don't know, but
A
I
lot.
really I really enjoy that book. I've read it a few times. Another really quick one is it's an audio book. It's Exactly What to Say by Phil M. Jones. I really enjoyed learning just little quips of how to structure what you say. And it's a very quick read, and it may influence the way that you structure your sales calls. It was quite fun to do a quick read. As far as transcription tools, we use Zoom, and their transcription tool is fantastic. I know that a few other partners use Fireflies. That's a pretty cool app as well. That is basically a little bot that dials in that can do your transcripts for you. And then, of course, we try to facilitate as much as possible through our client portal by logging all work orders, time logs, and tasks through there. It really has mitigated a lot of the back and forth communication around, an invoice or where we stand. And that's really helped us be as efficient as possible. So I don't know if anyone else has some interesting reads or resources. Please post it in the chat here for us all to benefit from. I'm always up for a good listen. My go-to is Audible. So with that, why don't we open it up to Q&A? Does anyone have any questions for us? How we perhaps handle certain situations, or what tools and resources we may use to keep our practices as efficient as possible?
Yeah, while questions are coming in, Loom just added a beta for transcription as well, which is one of the main reasons why I want to get things onto Loom, because it's just so nice to be able to have your comments log, see the transcription, while also being able to interact with the video itself.
Awesome. One of my favorite new tools that has come up is a software called Descript. And this is along the lines of it's really a video editor. You can do some recording as well, but it has an AI that can actually mimic your voice. So what's pretty cool is when you record your videos, it will do your transcription. And if you say an or an ah, or you forget a word or misspeak, you can actually just go into the text of that transcript, delete a word or add a word, and it would actually add that word in your own voice. So we starting to get deeper into that for our video editing, just to make it
I'm a big
professional.
proponent of a 2 times speed, sometimes 3 times speed. So, for Jeff's question, how often do you build clients, your terms, their terms?
Great. Yeah, so I think that this is going to be a great segue into our next topic, which we'll get into more robust next month, which is going to be on contracts. But Vinu, why don't you lead with how you bill your clients? I'll be happy to weigh in on our end.
Yeah, we have a few models, bi-weekly, monthly, there's retainers, there's projects. We're kind of experimenting still a little bit and trying new ones and new engagement styles. But I try to get at least a payment monthly for most. And with projects, we usually try and get a deposit. But it depends on the project. Sometimes projects are like fixed pricing, and sometimes projects are more like, this is your estimate, and we have like there's a lot of variability, and until we get halfway through, we're not going to know. So let's just handle it more like a quoted, bi-weekly, hourly type billing.
Susan, how about you?
I don't know. Christina does it.
Well, aren't you lucky?
I hate billing. But she takes care of it for us, and I think it's more or less every 2 weeks. I mean, and it just kind of depends.
Yeah, so I think that what we learned more recently is with these larger projects, man, you can easily rack up a lot of hours, especially
Yeah.
if you have a few people working on the account. So the way we set it up is we've gone almost exclusively to hourly billing. There are occasions that we'll do a fixed bid scope, but that scope of work really needs to be well defined and fewer variables in place. So on the fixed bid side, we do a 50% deposit, usually 40% at substantial completion, and then 10% on final acceptance. On the hourly side, we almost always get a retainer, a prepaid block of hours that sits on Zoho Books as a retainer account. We log hours daily in our system, and then we do a review and approval of those hours every 2 weeks, and usually bill on the 20th and the 5th of the month in 2-week increments. And then we just pay for those invoices with the retainer balance.
Yeah. I was going to say, ours is always from the retainer balance as well, pretty much.
Yeah.
Almost never do we have a bill standalone.
And yeah, for those of you who are newer partners or new to consulting, I highly recommend that you take that approach to get a retainer upfront.
Yeah.
It really helps to keep your cash flows in line, and will really help mitigate collection issues, and it keeps things moving well. So
keeps them motivated as
You
well,
should
because they
listen
have.
to
Yeah.
those. You should listen to those too. It could be helpful. we really don't. I've been trying to avoid it for so long. And there's only been one client that actively and regularly, I should have learned my lesson already, right? But like, yeah, it's definitely, it's a tough balance. So.
And keep in mind that the retainer model is going to work well for most clients. There will certainly be larger enterprise clients that have, corporate policies where you're going to have to go through their PO system and, issue invoices and wait 60 days for your money. And so anticipate that once you start to work with larger clients, that in some of these cases you are going to have to flex a little bit to meet
So,
the
John
clients
Mark,
where they are.
if you've got the PO, will you start before you receive money, even if it's a
Yes.
large client?
We have a rule of thumb that typically we will let balances go to 10%, or receivables go to 10% of the current project size, and we'll begin work ahead of a project, but typically if we're going to receive payment in the next 30 days. So we'll never really let anyone go more than 10K as a receivable, unless it is, again, 10% of a larger project. And we've had some projects that have been around 300K. So with that client over the course of a year, we'll let it flex, especially if we have 2 or 3 developers working on it. It's easy to put, 20 grand on an account in a matter of 3 weeks. So I think that our rule of thumb is really no more than 10K or 10% of the total project size, and we will begin work if we're anticipating payment within usually 2 weeks, and we'll flex a little bit.
Yeah, I usually just kind of work and then see what happens. It's not the best, but so far it's been fine, right? So it's an adventure.
I think that these are a perfect segues into next month's discussion, where we'll go into contracts and how to structure your terms and conditions. So I think that we're at the top of our hour here. Thanks, folks, for the recommendations of some books. We have Extreme Ownership by Willink, and we have Traction by Wickman. So some great suggestions there. So once again, appreciate everyone joining, and looking forward to seeing you again next month. So thanks a lot to Susan and Venu for joining me. It's a pleasure having you guys.
Thanks,
Good to see you guys.
All right, thanks a lot. Cheers.